I sort of merged those two things, and it helped me become a better editor.
It sounds like all the things that you did before you started editing actually contributed to your being able to do that. I
Absolutely.
I understand about the teaching, though. I don't think it's something that would be in my wheelhouse at all.
No, and I was lucky. I was teaching college students, so I didn't have to, deal with parents or
Mm.
high school testing or any of dictates from state systems. I was just dealing with the students, and it was still I was not I was not great at it.
Well, at least you know that now, though.
Exactly.
So until 2020, you were the managing editor of Writer's Digest Books. Um, when you became editor in chief, how did your responsibilities change?
Well, it kind of happened a little bit slightly differently, and it no one really knows this because we tried to keep it as quiet as we could, but Writer's Digest former parent company FNW Media went bankrupt in 2019,
All right.
and the pieces of FNW were sold off. So all of the books, including Writer's Digest books, were sold to Penguin Random House. So my job was eliminated, but all of the rest of Writer's Digest, including our website and the magazine and our online education and events, all went to this new parent company, Active Interest Media. So they very kindly created a job for me, which was just senior editor. And that only lasted for a few months because that happened in late 2019, and it was shortly thereafter in March of 2020 where I became editor in chief of the magazine. Um, so there was a window of time where I didn't really know what my job was. I was kind of making it up. I
Mhm.
decided that 2020 was our 100th anniversary. The magazine was founded in 1920. So I decided to become the archivist during that time period. So I spent most of those months in the archives, which are these fantastic bound books that are falling apart and the pages are yellowing, but they're great. They're just a real treasure. But that helped when I moved to the magazine. So as far as your actual question, which was how did my job change, I think the biggest change for me is the time frame. I was used to working on the books, which took 2 years. I would acquire them 1 year, and then 6 months later, I would get part of the manuscript, and then another 6 months later, I would get the rest of the manuscript, and um, the next 6 months would be spent revising it and laying it out and having it designed. And then a few months after that, it would go to the printer and then ship from most of the time it shipped from China. Going to the magazine, that time frame is really condensed, and that was a very big change for me. Now at the time we were doing 8 issues a year, so it was about a month and a half for each issue. We would start planning them out, the articles earlier than that. But as far as the actual time that we had to, edit the pieces and have it designed, it was a month and a half.
Mm.
So
Wow.
it's the time frame I think was um, one of the biggest shifts for me. And then of course working with so many different contributors instead of just one person.
Be like getting off the sidewalk onto a treadmill.
Pretty much.
Uh, so, how much of the magazine's content is freelance written versus in-house? I know a lot of people in our group have actually been published in Writer's Digest, including myself, and I'm curious to find out what kind of opportunities freelancers have there.
Um, I would say the majority is actually written. I would say 75% is written by freelancers.
Hmm.
We have a couple of features, a couple of recurring features each year. So our 101 best websites is written in-house. The agent roundup in our September, October issue is written in-house. And usually most of the WD interviews, the cover interviews, are done in-house. Aside from that, it's one or two columns and the rest is freelancers. Um, it would be fun to write more for the magazine. I think all of us would love to do that, but editors, I quickly realized that, how I said earlier, I wanted to find a job where I could read all day. Turns out that's not actually what an editor does. I we all wear multiple hats and work on different parts of the brand. So as much as I think we would love to write
Yeah,
more for
little
the
buddy.
magazine ourselves, we would we need to freelance quite a bit of it out.
Mhm. Well, that's good for us, for sure.
Mhm.
Do you have an editorial calendar at the magazine, and is there any way freelancers can access it?
Yes, I actually gave it to Dawn last week. I updated it for 2023. I guess I can, yeah, it looks like the chat is open, so I can drop it in the chat for you.
Oh, okay, great.
Um,
If he's got it, he can go ahead and send it to our listserv as well, so we can
yeah, I
have it.
think he was going to,
Mhm.
but I know
He
he's had
actually
some
did.
stuff
I just
to do.
saw it today. He sent it.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Okay.
We'll send it out again though.
So
What are
there's
the Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, there's the editorial calendar, but I do want to recommend that you all check out the link at the bottom of the editorial calendar, which is the submission guidelines. That page, it does have the submission guidelines, but it also lists um, the other columns that we frequently use freelancers for,
Hmm.
as opposed to recurring columnists. So, and we have added a few new ones for 2023. Um, we're going to change up some of the columns that we've had for quite some time and sort of rebrand them a little bit. So double check, make sure you check that submissions guideline page for the new columns that we have coming out, because I think they're going to be some fun ones.
Great. What kind of articles are you most interested in?
It depends on if you're talking about for the magazine or the website. I think because we do tons of freelance articles on the website as well. And my colleague Robert Brewer manages the website content, but the difference between the two is that with the website we can get a little more nitty gritty into the niche kind of stuff. Whereas with the magazine, I do try to make sure that it appeals to the broadest number of writers, because we do have that very limited space, unlike the website, which can go on and on forever. Um, so in terms of like the website is nice for timely content or very specific content, subgenres, that sort of thing. With the magazine, I do like to keep it sort of fresh takes on evergreen concepts, um, is the best way that I would put it. I was talking to Jane Friedman a couple of months ago. She moved back to Cincinnati, so we had lunch, and I was asking her, and I talked to Jessica Strasser about this too, the former editor-in-chief. Like, how did you both edit the magazine for such long periods of time? Because the ideas are, um, you know, to some in some respects they never change. We're always going to be talking about character development. We're always going to be talking about, how to write personal essays. We're always going to be talking about plotting, or outlining, that sort of thing. And it's all about those fresh takes, looking at those things in a different way so that maybe it resonates with someone who didn't quite get it when it was phrased a little bit differently. So I think those are the key differences, I think, in
Hmm.
what we're looking for.
Could you tell us what not to do? What kinds of pitches usually end up on the reject pile?
The ones that very quickly end up in the reject pile are the ones that are they should have been pitched 6 months ago for the issue that just hit newsstands this week. And it's really shocking how frequently that happens. And I always feel so bad because they're great ideas. They're not bad. It's just we have an entire issue about that idea that you can buy at Barnes and Noble right now. So that sort of thing get rejected very quickly. Um, the other
May
one,
I ask you?
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think some of the other ones are that we reject very easily are if you can find that version of the article 6 or 7 different times.
Hmm.
Like the one that we frequently get is "You're never too old to write." And while that is true, if you're going to pitch an article like that, it needs to have a really strong hook that is something beyond just "you're never too old to write," because we have lots of those articles,
Mhm.
things like that.
Um, is it? I'd like to, if I may. I know this can be kind of a touchy subject sometimes, but could you describe the general pay range with articles?
Yeah, ours is actually pretty uh, flat across the board. We usually do for the magazine, for the print magazine, is 50 cents per word.
Oh, okay.
So we just keep it easy for ourselves. With the website, it is less than that. It is
Mhm.
a flat fee regardless of the length, and it's usually between $50 and $100 per post, and
Mhm.
that just depends on, you know, is it something that is highly promotional, like promoting your new book that just came out, in which case it'll either be we won't pay you and we'll just put the links to your book in there, or it'll
Mhm.
be $50 because it's still promoting your content, or if it's something where we've assigned it to you, it'll be closer to
Mhm.
100.
Sure.
Just our online budget is a bit smaller.
Right. Do you grant first North American serial rights or something different?
Yes, we just take first English rights, and the option to reprint it either on our website for a bonus fee, or reprint it in an SIP, one of our
Mhm.
special interest issues. We didn't do those for a couple of years because of the bankruptcy and then the pandemic, where the newsstand
Sure.
was closed. But we are bringing it back this year, the SIP, for the first time since late 2018. So
Mm.
yeah, that we do a reprint fee, but yes, we only take um, first English rights. And I don't think we specify that it's North American because the magazine is distributed in, um, it has very limited distribution in England.
Mhm.
But
Sure. How would you say the magazine publishing industry has changed in the past few years? Do you think it's gotten better for writers or worse?
yeah, that's so interesting. I subscribe to Bosak's newsletter. I don't know if any of you, I think he lives in North Carolina or no, or Virginia. I'm not sure. I'm sorry. But he does a series of newsletters, 3 per day, and you can sign up. So I've sort of been following the magazine industry through the Bosak's newsletter for years now. And it's so interesting because there are elements of um, magazine publishing that have gotten better, and some that seem to there are still new magazines that are being created, and ours has done better since the newsstand reopened after the pandemic
Mm.
um, than prior, but there are still challenges in that Barnes and Noble. Barnes and Noble has been in the news a lot lately, but their new CEO, I think his name is James Daunt, he's sort of changing the way they do some of their business, and they are getting more stringent with their sell-through rate. So we have to sell through more copies of the magazine in order to stay on their newsstand each time. So there are some challenges like that. But where there are, where some opportunities are becoming smaller for writers in magazines, the opportunities on websites are just all over. So many of them are, if they're not staying print, they're going to digital, which is still, in some ways, that's easier because you can link to it much more quickly and add it to your clip list.
It's still publishing.
Yeah,
It's just a different
absolutely.
type. Yeah. Um, for a lot of us, and I know this was difficult for me when I first started freelancing, this whole interview process was kind of nerve-wracking for me. And since you've been a writer as well, was wondering if you had any advice for freelancers on how to conduct effective interviews.
Sure. Yes, I don't know if you can tell. My face turns red when when I'm conducting an interview or when I am being interviewed, because I do stress out about them. I want them to
Mm,
go very well, and I get nervous. And so the way I um, deal with that, I over prepare.
mm,
And I don't know if this is a good thing or not. It could really backfire, but I tend to, when I know I'm going to interview someone, I read everything they've written.
mm,
I interviewed Chris Bajalian last year for the May-June issue of the magazine, and he's written, at the time, it was 22 books, and now he's done another 2, so he's at 24 now, but I read all of the 22 that were available. um, because I thought, what if he mentioned something that happened in one of these books? Um, I need to be prepared to be able to talk about that. And I used to read all of the other interviews that people had done with that author as preparation, but I've kind of learned to step away from that. I will still read some interviews that they have done that are specific to writing, or some big publications where they have been interviewed. But there has come a point where being too prepared was problematic, because then I couldn't think of questions to ask.
mm.
It sort of shut down my brain. I was like, well, they've answered all the questions that are available, which is of course not true. And I have to remind myself that not everyone who is going to be reading the interview I have done with this person has read all of their backlist and all of the other interviews that they have done. So I will say, doing your research on that person obviously makes a lot of sense, but don't go too far.
Mm.
Don't stifle yourself by looking at everything they've ever done or all of the interviews they've ever given. And
Do
then
you
of
think it's
course,
more?
like, sorry, just the one last thing I will say is Don is great at interviewing, and I think
Mm,
I have garnered tips from him. He taught a class at the Writers Digest conference last month in New
mhm.
York, and he did an entire session about interview tips, and I was sitting in the back of the room taking notes because he knows what he's doing.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, I've known
finding
Don
resources
since he
like
was
that.
about 16 years old, and
Really?
I actually took his class before I became a writer when he was living in West Palm Beach, because he kept saying, "Well, maybe someday you'll be a writer," and I'm like, "Nah." And then it happened. But yeah, he's very effective as a teacher, and kind of makes you want to learn, which is the
Oh yeah.
best way to be a teacher. Would you, just curious? would you rather interview in person or on the phone? Or which is more effective, do you think?
Um, I've only had the opportunity to do one in-person interview, partially because of where I'm located. Being in Cincinnati, we don't get a whole lot of
Mm.
authors coming this way. We do have the Dayton Literary Peace Prize, so I was able to interview Min Jin Lee in person for, I think it was maybe a 2018 issue. Um, and I learned one important thing from doing that interview. Well, it was my first interview, and I was meeting her at her hotel, and I just assumed that there would be like a lounge area where we would be able to sit and talk quietly with each other. I did not take into consideration that it was Ohio State football season, and there was no quiet lounge area to be found in a hotel in Ohio at that point in time. So what I learned from that was, if I ever get the opportunity to do an in-person interview again, I will make sure in advance that I have a nice, quiet place to be able to do that, as opposed to assuming. All of the rest of the ones I've done have been video Zoom interviews or phone interviews. Um, I really prefer, I do like Zoom. I didn't think that I did, because I do get red and self-conscious, but um, it's so much nicer to be able to see the person's face and read their facial expressions. Um, I found we've been able to make a sort of human connection a little bit easier, and talk and laugh, and they open up a little bit more, or they see my cats walking around in the background. And uh, again, it sort of reminds us that we're human, and even though this is a person that I hugely admire, they are also still just a person. So I do like Zoom. Um,
Mm. I don't know what we would have done during the pandemic without it, because I think it enabled a lot of people, like my wife, for instance, to work from home. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to. So, yeah, I guess
Mhm.
if it had to come along, it probably came along at the best time.
It really did.
Well, those are the only questions I have for you, and I appreciate you taking the time. And again, I apologize for this snafu. I
No
I was
problem.
an IT manager for 25 years before I became a writer. You would never know it. So, talk about embarrassing. But at any rate, thanks for staying with us. I
Oh yeah, of
appreciate it.
course.
I'd like to open the floor to questions if anyone has any. Um,
I
just
have a question.
Anna.
Yeah. Could you tell a little bit more of the differences between the online version to the print version magazine? Like, do you look for different things in each of those?
Yeah, so with in terms of like the same article and adapting it for online versus print, or the two separate entities and
I guess the
what we
separate entities, and like,
okay.
does one have more of a focus in this area and the other one has a focus here? Like, are there big differences between them?
Yeah, I mean, we are trying to make the magazine cover more areas of writing. So trying to make sure that we do cover nonfiction every single time, and children's books every single time, and poetry every single issue. Um, but we're able to do that much more frequently and in greater depth in on the website. So
Mhm.
like, whereas we will only have um, you know Robert's poetry column, which is a one-page thing in the print magazine. On the
Mhm.
website, he posts poetry prompts every single month or every single week, and he posts poetic form every single week.
Mhm.
Um, or we're able to, you know, food writing is sort of, it's we don't cover it a lot in the magazine, because it's very specific kind of nonfiction writing, where it's incorporated in a very specific way in specific types of mysteries. But
Mhm.
we can explore that, and explore how different writers do that on the website, because we can post 3 to 5
Mhm.
articles a day. So we can get more granular, I think, and not have to worry about catering to the broader audience. that we do with the magazine.
I see. Thank you.
I think Frank Hyman has a
Yeah, Frank
question.
got a question.
Frank?
Do you want to ask it, Frank, or have one of us read it?
Yeah, no, I can read it if you can hear me all right.
Yeah. Hi,
Mhm.
Frank.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering how the readership of Writer's Digest splits out. Like, if you have any idea what proportion are writing genre fiction or versus YA versus journalism versus nonfiction. Well, if you have any kind of data on that, I'm just curious.
Well, we do have, the last time we did a survey along those lines was in late 2018, because the bankruptcy happened at Writer's Digest in 2019, followed by the pandemic. So we haven't had the time or resources to do a new survey since then, although that is on our to-do list for this year. So our data might be a little dated, but most of our, we do have more fiction writers than nonfiction writers. More of our writers are middle-aged women than men in any other group. We are sort of growing our younger audience, but as far as I think we do have more genre writers than, say, literary fiction. And I think that kind of goes back to Writer's Digest sort of colloquial tone. We try to make writing accessible for everyone. So we, I love reading romance. I love reading thrillers. We don't look down on any of that, whereas some other publications might have a preference toward literary fiction. So just the fact that we do include writing instruction for genres, I think just inherently brings more genre writers to our offerings.
Does anyone
I-
else have a question for Amy?
I've got one. Hi, Amy. Can you tell us if there are sections of the magazine for which you don't receive as many queries as you'd like, sections that you would sort of, advise people to try writing in?
I would love to see, we have a column called For All Ages, and it's, we believe that children's and YA writing should be read by people of all ages because it is delightful, but we don't get a lot of pitches for that area. That might partially be because it's a newer column. This 2020 is the first year that we had it. We introduced it in March of 2022. So I think just because it's newer, we haven't gotten a lot of pitches for it, and I would love to see more. And with that, we've sort of done a mix of interviews with children's authors or YA authors and instruction. This is how you work rhyme into picture books and work page turns into picture books, that sort of thing. Or write horror for middle grade audiences. So we would be open to any of that kind of interviews or instructional writing in that column. It's a 2-page column, about 1,200 words.
Okay, thank you. And just a comment, I'm thrilled to see that you're going to have an editing column now coming up in March, I think it is.
Yes, so that was the column that is replacing was our workbook column, and the workbook column sort of morphed a couple of times over the years. It used to be the writer's workbook, and it was a 8-page section, I think, but it was when we had Writer's Digest books and we took excerpts from those books that were workbook type material and used it in the magazine, because it was a great instructional material, but also was nice to sort of cross promote in an organic, in a natural way, these books that we were publishing. Now that we don't have access to those books anymore, we changed it to the MFA workbook in 2020. And we thought, we don't do a lot of coverage about MFA programs or that sort of area of writing. And wouldn't it be great if we could have this MFA workbook section where students or instructors who are participating in MFA programs can sort of share what they have learned. This is what we learned in our MFA workshops. We very quickly learned that that is not the case. Most of the MFA programs are just workshopping each other's material, and that doesn't make for great instructional content for the magazine. And a lot of the students and instructors who are participating in those programs are so focused on the writing that they are doing for those workshops that they don't have time to, write a magazine article of 1,600 words on the side, even if it means a byline and a little extra money in their wallet. So we decided to change things up in 2023 and do an editing column, because editing is so important. And I realized that we weren't addressing it very much in the magazine. We would do a feature here and there from an editor, about a specific type of editing. But I think having it in the issue every time and thinking about the different ways to edit or the different types of editors and why it is so important and how you can make it work, or working through the problems with self-editing is very important.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad you're excited about it.
I am.
That's a good point too, because editing isn't just having someone else edit your work, it's you editing your own work as well.
Right.
And you can always
Right,
save the editor
right.
a lot of work by not, sending in stuff that needs a lot of editing. Does anyone else have any questions for Amy?
I do.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
I have a question about interviews. Would you be open to interviewing more than one person on a theme rather than a one-person interview that's just about sort of more in depth about them?
Yeah, we've had a couple of those in the past, and they are fascinating. I think it's been a while since we had one. Maybe the last one was in January of 2022, February of 2022, and it was an interview with multiple agents, asking for their sort of tips and what they wish writers knew going into the querying process, that sort of thing. And it's great because you get so many different viewpoints on a topic that it helps you consider how, a no from this person might not be a no from another person. So I really like those kind of roundup interviews. We don't often do them as the cover interview, the Writer's Digest interview, but we will include them in the feature well. And I would say our March-April issue for 2023 would be a great one for that, because we're exploring genre in that one. So my idea behind it, and of course this could change based on the pitches we get, but I was thinking, it'd be great to have an article about something to do with romance writing, something to do with mystery thriller writing, something to do with fantasy writing, and having an interview roundup style piece with multiple authors consider. I will say we are, when those pitches come, we do sort of like to have an idea of who the authors are that you're going to try to interview, and we try to make sure that we are interviewing, or that we are including a diverse group of authors. We never want to see an interview that is just white cishet people in an interview. We want to see a diversity of people included, because different perspectives are important to us.
Thanks.
Well, I guess that's about time. And again, I'm sorry that we went so long over what we were supposed to do, but again, Amy, I really appreciate you sticking with us. And this was my first Zoom call moderation, so
Well done.
maybe it'll be my last too, It's beginning to look like it right now, I'll tell you. But again, sorry about the technical glitches, and thank you so much for taking so much time with us tonight. We really enjoyed it and got a lot of valuable information from you.
Yeah, it was wonderful.
yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for your
Yeah, of
patience.
course. Oh, no problem at all. Yeah, I will say, if you do send your pitches, make sure to include in the subject line that you're part of the TAF, because we've had a lot of great writers I see a lot of familiar names in here. So don't hesitate to put that in there. And I will also say, don't hesitate to follow up. I mentioned before that we are all wearing multiple hats, so it is very easy for things to slip through the cracks. And I know Dawn has had to follow up with me before, and so don't ever feel bad about that.
Okay, great.
Will do. All right. Well, thank you everyone for attending. Thanks again, Amy. And as Amy said, you guys know where to pitch. So, that'll be the next thing. You'll get inundated with pitches tomorrow, I'm sure.
I probably won't get to them until after Labor Day, but send them
Good
my
point.
way.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Thank you, Amy.
All right.
Thank
Well,
Thank you
thanks,
very
everyone.
much.